Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Climate Change, Managing Risk Impact on the Food Supply Chain. I'm your moderator, Adrienne Bloom, Editorial Director of Food Safety Magazine, and this is the 11th webinar in the Food Leadership Series brought to you by Food Safety Magazine and sponsored by LRQA. So thanks for joining us today. So the Food Leadership Series brings together some of the food industry's leading figures to showcase their expertise and analysis. The format for this webinar will be a little different than what you're accustomed to. I will pose questions for our distinguished panel for discussion, which will be followed by polling questions for all attendees to answer, so make sure to keep your eyes open for those. Also, please submit your questions for the panelists throughout the presentation, and we'll conclude the webinar with a live Q&A. Also, today's event is being recorded and archived on food-safety.com. So before we dive in, I would like to share a few words about our sponsor. Bringing together unrivaled expertise in certification, brand assurance, and training, LRQA is one of the world's leading providers of food safety and assurance solutions. LRQA has ensured safety and sustainable food across the supply chain for over 36 years. World-leading food safety, traceability, and sustainability certification and assurance programs help ensure your business produces, manufactures, and sells safe products to the highest standards consistently. So now I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. We have with us Patrick Pagliarani, Global Supplier Quality Director at Barilla. We also have Andrew Clark, Senior Director of Quality Assurance at Loblaw. And we have Kimberly Coffin, Global Technical Director of Supply Chain Assurance at LRQA. So unfortunately, Clint Roberts, Senior Director of America's Supplier Quality at McCormick & Company, won't be able to join us today. But we're very excited for our discussion with our panelists. So let's dive right in. So I think for this topic that we're discussing today, one of the first things that we need to understand is the landscape that we're looking at and living in today and how that affects how we operate and how we do business. So the first question I'd like to pose to our panelists today is, what are some of the emerging food safety risks that are presented by climate change related events? And I'll invite Kimberly to head off on this question for us first.
Thanks, Adrienne. And it's great to be here back with Food Safety Magazine and have the opportunity to reach out and share some really excellent thought leadership. I'm sure everybody will enjoy it today. I guess when I think about kind of climate change, and more specifically think about weather-related kind of natural disasters, and those people that have actually heard me speak previously is, when I see things like this in the news, my first thought is clearly for the impact on the local communities and the people. But the next thing that I jump straight to is, what do they actually grow there? Or what do they produce there? And what's the potential impact on the food supply chains and more specifically on the risk to food safety? What are the things that those companies that are located there need to be thinking about? And when I think about, really the types of food safety risks, I mean, we could have a whole session today and talk about the numerous numbers of risks that there are. And I put them into two principal buckets. Those are more specifically related to things that have to do with extreme heat and or drought or fires, as well as those that kind of sit in wet, relate to kind of extremely wet conditions or flooding conditions and the things that we need to be thinking about. And when I think about kind of the first, where we're talking extreme heat and fires, clearly from a chemical perspective, we know that there's a serious increase in the prevalence of various types of mycotoxins that need to be managed by companies that work with grains and cereals and other mycotoxin susceptible raw materials and commodities. But also when we think about kind of that heat and those extreme weather events that raise those temperatures, or just the overall global warming, is really, when you think about microbiological risks associated with those foods that are temperature controlled and the critical risks and the potential for food safety, not so much contamination from a biological perspective, but the proliferation of things like salmonella or increased incidence of Campylobacter that are related to the management of that temperature controlled distribution of those products. From a flooding perspective, I always go to the impact of soil-borne types of contaminants, whether they actually get into water systems, and we use lots of water from a food manufacturing perspective, and understanding that impact, but also thinking about, the soil contaminants on agricultural commodities that are being grown in the soil, as well as, the runoff, as I said, into water sources, but also even from a livestock perspective, and potential for microbial presence on or at higher levels in livestock that we actually will then send to slaughter, that'll then enter into the food chain. And thinking really very much about what are those control measures that we have in place or that organizations have in place are really effective in actually managing that increased bacterial load or microbiological load. And then the final comment that I'll say, or the final risk that I think we all need to keep top of mind, is any type of natural disaster or climate-related weather event will potentially have a significant impact with regards to the amount of food that can be produced, or the raw materials that can be produced, which means we have decreased production. And with decreased production comes a really great opportunity for the criminal element to actually look at how they can actually take advantage of that lower availability of materials. And so we have an increased prevalence of food fraud.
Thank you for those insights, Kimberly. Andrew, do you have something you'd like to add to this question?
I certainly do. Being obviously a large retailer, we have to have our eye on the ball when it comes to the climate and the change in weather patterns, but also the hazards associated with the change that we're seeing. And Kimberly touched on quite a few things, which I'm going to add to. I think one of the most important things is to understand that this isn't something on the horizon; it's already here when it comes to the issues linked to climate change. And if I start off with foodborne pathogens and parasites and how they evolve, because they can they're pretty good at evolution, and they evolve very quickly, but also they can be distributed rapidly by the climate, and particularly with as Kimberly mentioned, with issues with flooding and water courses. So it's making sure that we understand our supply chain, and where commodity items that may be impacted are grown, what events are occurring in those regions, but also the existing pathogens and parasites that occur, and how they can impact our supply chain. So it's keeping on top of that to understand that the existing hazards occur, and we need to understand that the supply chain is managed accordingly. I also want to talk about algal blooms, because we're seeing the oceans warm up, shall we say. You're seeing algae move and grow much more rapidly than it ever has before. So impacting sort of marine life and fish, of course, because it's growing exponentially, because the seas are much warmer than they ever were. But along with that, you're getting a rise and increase in Vibrio parahemolyticus, because and those of you that work in the world of fish will understand what that is. But it's evolving, and the algae is helping that to sort of proliferate within the oceans, which is causing an issue. Additionally, the melting of permafrost is releasing, and I don't want to scare anyone, but once frozen pathogens that are probably yet to be discovered, because they've been frozen for thousands of years. Remember, I'm not going to say that they're all pathogenic, or the microorganisms are pathogenic, but there may be some in there. But the release of pathogens and the thawing of permafrost, and is causing issues there, but also releasing heavy metals as well at the same time. So that's another concern, and we've seen a rise in heavy metals. And then if we go into the concern with mercury with fish, of course, as a very large importer of fish. There's some fish that are very much impacted by accumulation of mercury, because they eat fish that have eaten the mercury and so on. So it accumulates in the final commodity, shall we say? So it's making sure that we understand that, because that's increasing as well, the level of mercury in the oceans. And then, of course, we've got the adaptation of pests and the issues that they bring, because we're seeing a longer life of pests, or a changed life, because of the climate, and it gives them the ability to breed longer, because the weather patterns are such that it's milder weather, so they can breed longer, and or start earlier in their breeding cycle. So that's causing another issue. I also add the mycotoxins, of course, because that's particularly an issue with grains and so forth, because high humidity can cause a significant issues there. So quite a lot to think about overall when it comes to the existing food safety risks, but also some of the emerging ones that hopefully the discussion today will provoke some thought on, considering the supply chain and where some of the raw materials are coming from.
Well, thanks for those comments, Andrew. And, considering this background and the risks and effects that we've just discussed, how can we monitor the supply landscape for new food safety risks that may impact your products and business? Patrick, maybe you'd like to lead us off on this discussion question.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, indeed, when you go into monitoring, I guess that the first answer that you get to yourself is horizon scanning. I guess that this is something that in the last year has been developed and taken by many companies. For us, it was a long journey for scouting the best product and the best tool that we really wanted. I think that at the beginning of the year, we really have found what we wanted, especially due to the fact that some companies are really welcoming you and adapting to your needs. Because indeed, when you have, we buy a lot of raw materials in a range that goes from really paper to tomatoes to onions to wheat and barley. So it's a very wide range. And then when you have a tool that has to help you to forecast and to monitor what is going to happen, it's normally very complex. But as I said, I think that we are there, and I believe that we also have found a company that is a partner, because I believe that alert monitoring is just the beginning here, because it's a real time. Yes, it's a real time information, but I believe that here there is something that can go very further, because we are not talking about real prediction or forecast, but we are talking about real alerts. But these tools are going in that direction. And this is why I believe that it's very important to be in a partnership with one of these companies, because it's a journey that will be tailored to one raw material, cannot be to a lot of raw material when you have a prediction. So, and AI will play a role in that. So it's something that maybe we are not fully ready to have today, but I believe that is going to happen in a way or in another in the next years. And this is why I believe we have to be close to a company that is able to go there. Then on top of horizon scanning, we have an integrated supply chain for a lot of material, not for all materials, but for the very important ones. For us, we have an integrated supply chain where we have, of course, the option to control everything down to the field. So with this kind of raw materials, we have a system to predict, not maybe in the long term, but at least for 1-2 weeks, based on the moment of growing of the plants and the weather, we can predict mycotoxin, for example. And so we have already, at the beginning of the crop, some information that help us to understand where, from a quality and food safety point, we are, and of course for the output of the crop. We have also more in the long-term collaboration with CNR INEA to predict in the long term up to 6-8 months the weather. This is, for example, in the European project of MedGold, where we have collaborated for some of the raw materials that we have in order to adapt the weather data to our system, and we are currently use them. Then, of course, there is also a monitoring around the other areas where we can have a source, of course, for some of the raw materials. To be honest, if I have to say that there was a big change from in the countries where we source cereal, for example, the answer would be not, but we are strictly monitoring. It's interesting to see, for example, that at least for our experience, the warmer winters seems to help the growth of some cereals in areas where before was really unthinkable. So definitely we should monitor that to follow where we can go to have the best crop and the best quality.
Well, thank you, Patrick. That's really interesting. Andrew, maybe you'd like to speak to this question as well.
Okay, yeah, certainly. With the organisation I work for is for those of you who don't know, is the largest retailer in Canada. So we've got every single commodity that you could possibly think of. So monitoring is incredibly difficult when you've got that portfolio, and so what we tend to do is be connected with lots of different organizations and do quite a significant amount of horizon scanning to understand where potential issues could occur. So we're looking at obviously from a business perspective as well as a food safety perspective, because the demand is there for quite a variety of different products. So we need to make sure that availability is crucial to us as a business, but with obviously without introducing any risks by sourcing from different regions. So we've got quite a fluid and flexible supply chain. But from a monitoring perspective, certainly we do a considerable amount of horizon scanning, connected to many different organizations, particularly government networks and that type of thing. InfoSan, International Food Safety Authorities Network, FAO have published lots of documents on food safety and climate change. So trying to get ahead and predict is crucial from a supply chain perspective. But certainly sort of the monitoring and being connected with, we've got a pretty significant supplier base, and I rely on their expertise, a lot of their expertise, to sort of advise where we need to look and what we need to consider in terms of the supply chain and ensuring that it's safety, of course. But we also have what we call vendor development managers that are geographically placed in different regions of the world, and so they've got a very tight connection with the suppliers in different regions. So they are also a resource for us, and they're very connected with particularly my group. So we sort of support each other in terms of managing risk and understanding the food safety requirements, but also the potential risks. So we try to get ahead as much as we can, but certainly things happen. But government websites, academia, but also conferences, very significantly important resource for us to sort of plan. Because we have a 5-year plan in terms of food safety and quality at Loblaw that we sort of adapt and adjust to take into account various issues as and when they occur.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and Patrick as well. It's really interesting to hear how you use horizon scanning in your businesses. So now what we're going to do is an audience poll. So this is your chance, attendees, to give your input on this question. So how does your organization primarily monitor emerging food safety risks associated with climate change? So we have a few answers for you to pick from. Utilizing real-time data from global surveillance systems, or searching World Wide Web for news and updates. Also implementing internal risk assessment protocols, or engaging with government agencies and research institutions, or none of the above. So again, how does your organization primarily monitor emerging food safety risks associated with climate change? And we'll leave that up there for just another few seconds, give you all some time to respond. And then we will discuss the answers. All right, looks like we've just got a few more responses coming in here. Give you guys a few more seconds. All right, now let's go to the answers and see what we have here. All right, it looks like the majority of you said searching the web for news and updates. That was about a third of the folks who responded, almost a third. And then followed closely by implementing internal risk assessment protocols. So that's interesting responses there. Any comments from the panelists on those?
Well, the second one, searching World Wide Web for news, is basically a longer version of the first one, because horizontal scanning is really making the second point much shorter and easy to do. So they are basically, at the end, they have the same object, but it's done in a different way. Of course, risk assessment is very important. It's not easy to make, especially if you have a lot of raw materials and they are in different countries. Making a real risk assessment on the field might be very difficult. It is very efficient if you have a shorter supply chain. And of course, this is done by the majority of the companies to make them at a global level with many items. It can be very challenging. And of course, it's right to be engaged in the government, with the government agency and research institution. Probably is very good to do that for the long term. If you have to monitor issues in the following months, maybe it can be challenging in this way. That's my view on that.
Great. Thanks, Patrick, for your comments. All right, so let us move. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kimberly.
I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting. Patrick's really spot on, and I loved his explanation previously about we may not be there yet, but the importance of these real-time data, digital types of tools to help us actually ease that surveillance process, I think are going to be something that as an industry, we're going to need to come to terms with actually doing in order to actually really be able to continue to manage the change effectively.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Kimberly, for that. All right, so let's move on to our next discussion topic. And, as we've been discussing, one thing a lot of people are looking at and wondering about is the effects of climate change on supply sourcing. So how has climate change impacted your sourcing and supply quality risk landscape? I'd like to invite Andrew to lead us off on this question.
Yep, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, with the size of the company is pretty significant. So our supply chain is in some cases very, very large, very complex. We do have the ability to pivot quickly in terms of availability and that type of thing. So we've got a multitude of suppliers. But what I will say is climate change can significantly impact supply chain and the quality in terms of availability, because we've seen world events that occur that can significantly impact a commodity item. The knock-on effect to that can be, if that's an ingredient in a product, then you have to modify the product that you have as the ingredient, which means label change, which means significant impacts, which the general consumer doesn't really get. They don't understand the implications when there's a change in a commodity item, and how that can impact a multitude of different products. So things can happen, and we've seen it around the world with different events that are occurring, and not just climate change. But so from a quality perspective, then there's sometimes an impact on availability. Now, being a retailer, that doesn't always go down well with your customer, that you don't have the product that they expect you to have. And over the many years, and at my age, that I've seen the supply chain and the global supply chain and the availability increase to when I was a child. Is much more. There's much more. Particularly produce available than there ever was before, at different times of the year, but the demand is always there. But naturally, when issues do occur, we've had issues with oranges because of the availability of oranges, which impacts the availability of oranges on the shelf, but also orange juice and that type of thing. So it does impact incredibly quickly, but we're in a position where we are able to pivot and change our supply chain quickly, but not always. Sometimes we're just not able to meet the demands of the customer because of availability, and that could be due to issues with the weather that's impacted crops and so on. So it does have a knock-on effect in many different ways, and it's not just the commodity items, it's what the commodity items are then used in different products. So it can be very impactful. But as I mentioned earlier, we try and get ahead of that, but sometimes you just can't. Things happen. But what we need to do is try to preempt events where we can, and plan for that. And we do a pretty good job of that. But it certainly is. We're seeing issues with availability, and I think everyone understands the availability of fish, for example, is the demand's there for fish, but it's the availability of fish is dwindling over time for various reasons, and it is impacting our customer base, and because but I think everyone's suffering from the same demands, but also the ability to actually source various commodities is impacted, and we all feel the issues when it's just not available. Sometimes you just can't predict, however well you do your horizon scanning or your monitoring.
Well, thanks, Andrew. And Kimberly, would you like to add on to that at all?
Look, I think it's from a retailer perspective, Andrew, I can totally appreciate the whole availability piece, and also probably customers not understanding. We know that we've been in a place whereby the cost of actual food inputs is increasing significantly. The cost of getting food to the customer is increasing, all at a time when customers want everything always now. So from a retailer perspective, that inability causes you significant impact, I'm sure. And when I think about it from a manufacturer's perspective, there's things that we're increasingly seeing. A number of the manufacturers that we work with doing, specifically looking at making sure they've got alternative supply. So looking at, whereas before they might have had one particular supplier of materials, specifically critical, and even some of their critical materials, in order to ensure quality continuance at a particular standard, meeting specifications. But now starting to look at alternative supplies from a geographic perspective, to and having a couple suppliers or more to ensure that consistency of supply and maintenance of standards, but also then looking at alternative ingredients. So looking at formulation impact and whether they can substitute in the event that there's actually a lack of availability, because they do need to continue producing. I think this also comes into and clearly this importance of actually understanding risk exposure. So being able to monitor effectively, to understand whether it's predict or actually get the foresight to actually think about where those potential those potential risks may occur, and trying to cover all bases, specifically looking at kind of what that would do in the event that there was a particular material that comes from one particular part of the world and what that impact is. I also say that, from a consumer perspective, purely looking at it from a consumer perspective, we need to start thinking about what do we really need versus what we want. And one of the things that I think is, brilliant in some respects is, here in the UK, being based here in the UK now, is I follow the seasonality of things like fruits and vegetables, and products that are made with those fruits and vegetables, and look for seasonal products and try to eat in seasonal. And I think more and more from a consumer perspective, we need to come to terms with the fact that we need to work with the seasons, and we need to actually work with what's available.
Thank you, Kimberly. And, taking this a little further and looking at procurement, what materials and products have presented the greatest challenge to maintaining company standards for quality and food safety? Patrick, maybe you could lead us off on this one.
Yeah, of course, this question, if you take just what was the problem with the output of the raw material, then the list of raw materials that have been impacted would be very long. Then if you restrict into quality and food safety, it is shorter, but consider that scarcity of material, it's a threat for quality and food safety. So every time you have a supply chain with scarcity and poor availability, you have to keep up your monitoring, because quality and food safety issues may come at any time. To go directly to the answer of these questions, it's not me to say that, of course, cocoa is a problem. It's a problem for every food industry that buys. It's now $7 per kilo from $4, and then they say, World Bank saying, have a forecast of the same price for the fall 2025. So cocoa is a problem now, and it will be a problem in the next year, probably the next 2 years. So of course we have to look at our supply chains, reinforce it, and keep monitoring for quality and food safety issues. Even if I have to say that for now, yes, we have seen delays in deliveries. We didn't see with our eyes quality and food safety issues different from normal. So it's a still good performance of the supply chain, but of course it's something that we are looking into. But it's not just cocoa. If you remember, like a year and a half ago in Spain, there was a dryness that was really exceptional, and if you wanted to buy peppers, it was very difficult. The quality we had there was very, very bad. We have to move in other countries. So this is another one. Or basil and tomato that we buy in large quantity for our sauces. This year, both had issues with heavy, inconstant and unpredictable rains. So the start of the harvest was very difficult. The quality was lower. So again, you have scarcity of good quality material. We had also issue with potato powder, which is not something that we buy a lot, but there was, potato cultivation they had problems for the entire spring and the beginning of the summer. In our case, where we were sourcing in Belgium, was really heavy rainfalls. So we had to move to another country again to maintain the same quality. So if you buy a wide range of materials with climate change, you have threats a little bit everywhere in terms of output. Then it's up to you really to risk assess and trying to see where this scarcity of output may impact quality and food safety.
Thanks for those comments, Patrick. And Kimberly, where have you seen the challenges to maintaining company standards for FSQ, when it comes to procurement of materials and products?
Look, I think Patrick hit a number of the ones that I was going to speak to, but I think sugar continues to be an issue from a global perspective with regards to both, and it comes down to that scarcity and at the quality that's required in order to maintain standards. And look, Andrew also touched on the unavailability of oranges, one of the probably the most recent kind of piece that I've seen is the fact that Brazil, who really produces 70% of the global volume of orange juice concentrate, had a really poor harvest this year due to extreme heat, not wet, but heat. And their actual harvest was 24% less than normal standards. So when you kind of put those two figures together, 75% of the orange juice concentrate that's used globally, from exported globally, and 24% less oranges harvested. I can see anybody that actually has a dependency from an orange juice concentrate perspective or oranges coming out of Brazil is going to have to really look at alternative sources or looking at what are they actually going to do in order to maintain the availability of their products.
Okay, thanks for those comments, Kimberly. Now, kind of looking further at how we're grappling with all of this, the next thing I want to discuss is, or ask, is has your business needed to rapidly onboard any new suppliers because of unexpected shortages due to climate change impacts? And if so, how have you successfully navigated that process? I'd like to invite Andrew and Patrick to answer this question. Andrew, maybe you can lead us off on this one.
Yes, certainly. I think we saw, if there was a positive from the COVID pandemic, I think the positive was how it challenged us as an industry to pivot and react really quickly. And I think from my experience within my company, it was incredible how we were able to do that and still keep product on the shelf, and that was because of the supply chain that we've got, but also the procurement company, the procurement folks that we've got within the business, because they certainly understand the expectations from a quality and safety perspective, because we've got set requirements when it comes to onboarding a new vendor. So what we did to move quickly, instead of the usual emails and onboarding, because it takes time to onboard certainly a new supplier, is to actually travel to the sites and go through the process of onboarding with them. But initially, they needed to be able to meet the specification that we required, and also the volumes that we required. But instead of the slow approach from us and them not being together, there was a lot more collaboration with our suppliers and the supply network. But I think the crucial part was lots more interaction and actually traveling to the sites to onboard them, rather than doing it via email, because email takes forever really. And so the reliance on that was a lot less. But we still kept to obviously the foundational elements of our programs and the requirements to have maintain a GFSI certification, that type of thing, as a food supplier into us. But what we did was a lot more, believe it or not, traveling to actually go to the site to get the multiple steps that we usually have in onboarding a vendor condensed. So we did it much quicker. And what we saw was relatively low impact, I would say, from my perspective, that we were able to sort of change and modify our programs. But as I said at the beginning here, that was one of the benefits from the pandemic, which is a weird thing to say, but it was the ability to be flexible, but without adding risks to the business. We weren't circumventing our processes; we were just condensing them, and I think there was a lot more effective communication than we've ever had before. So it helped significantly, but. And it happens from time to time, and sometimes it is linked to obviously it could be a crop failure and that type of thing. But so we have to move quickly. But we do, because we, even though we're sort of a Canadian company, the global supply chain is global, and so we are required to interact with every region of the world, and with that comes obviously a lot of risk in the supply chain, because events occur. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. It's very interesting. And Patrick, would you like to speak to this question as well?
Yeah, I can bring you a real-time example with which I will challenge the Andrew story here. So we had, yeah, as I mentioned back, we had some potato powder issue in Belgium. This means that we had to move in another country. Okay, so we had one buyer and one supplier quality manager auditing on site, completing the audit, agreeing on the specifications and on the qualification trials in 1 week. So on this, really, I was even surprised by myself because I've never seen a complete, done onboarding process in such a short time. And we also thought, what was the enabler to do that? And I think that the first one is definitely the experience, because procedures here, yes, they help a little to have an emergency procedures. That's what the auditor will say. But here we had people capable to go there and take decisions really in a short time to adjust the new supplier's requirements to ours by himself. So that was really what enabled us to have an alternative suppliers in a very short time available to supply the same material. So we may come back on that, but I believe that this is really the key enabler to manage emergency situation, and the emergency situation are definitely the first outcome of the climate change.
Okay, well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Andrew, for those insightful comments. So now we're going to do another poll for attendees here. All right, so the question this time around is, what has been the biggest challenge for your business in maintaining supply chain integrity in the face of climate change? So is it sourcing from new geographical areas, ensuring consistent quality and safety standards, managing increased costs and logistical challenges, rapidly adapting to supply chain disruptions, or other challenges? Again, what's the biggest challenge for your business in maintaining supply chain integrity in the face of climate change? So we'll leave that up there for a little bit, let you guys read through the answers again, and select the answer that applies most to your business, and then we'll see what everybody came out with, and we'll discuss that. Discuss the results here in a second. Give you guys a little bit more time to respond. We appreciate your participation in these polls. It's always insightful to hear what attendees are experiencing in their business. Okay, looks like just a couple more seconds and then we'll go to the answers. All right. Let's look at the results. So we had almost half of you say ensuring consistent quality and safety standards. So that was 47% of the responses. And then a quarter of you said managing increased cost and logistical challenges. So that was a good chunk of the responses as well. Any comment on the results from the panelists?
Yeah, I thought that maybe the third one would be on the top, but it seems that quality and food safety it is. Here, of course, it would be interesting to understand if this is ensuring quality and food safety because of the threat of the climate change or because of real issues happening to the materials that you buy, because it's two different scenarios. I believe that is more on the first one, and in that case, I understand the 50%. But for the rest, yeah, it's I'm quite in line with this.
I'm a bit surprised that there weren't more that we're talking about sourcing from new geographical areas. I actually would have expected that to be slightly higher, and I actually thought, like Patrick, that the managing increased cost and logistics would actually be the winner, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I have the perception that sourcing from a new geographical area is a problem, but potentially I believe that the real need to make the change has not happened yet. That could be maybe why.
All right, well, thank you all for discussing those results. So let's move on to our next discussion topic. So going a little deeper on the subject of supply sourcing, what kinds of changes have you made to your FSQ supplier due diligence programs to ensure the safe quality supply of materials? Patrick, I'll invite you to lead us off on this question.
Thank you. This is probably the most difficult one because it's the challenge here is to understand really if you did something really because of the climate change, or there were other things happening in the course of time, because the climate change is more than 15 years that we are mentioning that. It is an increasing topic, but it's not definitely new. So in the 15 years, a lot of things happened. Also from a regulatory point of view, mycotoxin sampling or mycotoxin assessment and other stuff came out in these years. And so of course Barilla had to follow that. At the same time, climate change was probably requiring the same to be covered. So our attention for mycotoxins in the cereals scenario has definitely increased. As I mentioned at the beginning, in the most critical areas, we have satellites imaging that can help to see where the crop is weak, and based on the meteor, on the weather forecast, we may choose what kind of treatment do, and we can see if some of the mycotoxin can grow or not. It's not as easy, but this is the summary. So this is something that has been developed not yesterday. It has been some years, but is definitely in line with the threats that the climate change brought. Then there is the other discussion about the more quality assurance part with the supplier quality activities and the onboarding of new suppliers. The number of new suppliers that has onboarded has definitely increased in the last 10 years. And then as a consequence, we had to adapt to a more flexible way of work, maintaining the same level of quality and food safety. So we have adapted our way of work with some elements to make it more flexible. And the end of the story here, it's of course on top to have some adjustment in the frequency of surveillance, in the increasing of the homologation time. This kind of arrangements goes, yes, of course they are important, but I go back to the topic I raised before. The training and the experience of our people is the most important things, because when you have to face something unpredictable, procedures and tools, yes, can help, but if you don't have expert people to take decision quickly, I don't think that you can manage this. So we are investing a lot in training, and we have planned to do even more for the next 2025. And I believe that this is probably the key things that we will focus on.
All right, thank you, Patrick. And Andrew, what changes have you made to your FSQ supplier due diligence programs?
Thanks for that. Quite significant changes, I'd say, over the last 5 years in terms of staffing and enhancing competence. So not just the training, we've also got methods for evaluating competency after the training to make sure it's effective, that type of thing. I do some of the training for the team. I've got a very strong quality assurance team. And so over the last 5 years, we've built that and made it stronger and stronger with the ability to challenge issues, but also support our suppliers through assessing risk and understanding where they can make improvements in their programs, because our suppliers are very much business partners to us, and my group is seen as enablers to the business. And I think sometimes that's missed by the food safety world. We're almost perceived as a barrier, but we're not. We try and guide our vendors, because I think one of the sort of the benefits of working for a large retailer is you see lots and lots of different systems and programs across the various product categories, and what we see that works well in one area, we can support in other areas and share our knowledge and understanding with our and our expertise with our suppliers, because ultimately we're not producing anything. We're very much reliant on them. So enhancing competence of the team has been crucial to us, but also using the use of data and monitoring data, because we do a lot of product testing, we do a lot of audits, and and we've got complaint data. So it's utilizing that data to make risk-based decisions and driving change where we need to drive change, because obviously we've got some targeted areas that we need to look at when it comes to variability of the supply chain, and so we don't have a huge resource, but we target the resource into the appropriate areas. But we also utilize third parties and expertise of third parties and support our suppliers when they're having issues with sort of guiding them to different third parties to support them, because no one's an expert on everything, but fortunately I've got a network where I can reach out and identify experts when the need requires. So we've looked at reevaluating the testing protocols that we've got to do more targeted testing, not more extensive testing, more targeted testing, because you can't test risk out of a product, but what we can sometimes do is preempt that. And we've also modified our audit program, our vendor audit program, to be more focused on behaviours, supplier behaviour, but also looking at the various risks associated with it, because our audit standard, the Loblaw audit standard, doesn't just look at it is not a duplication of a GFSI audit. It's looking at the behaviours that are demonstrated at the vendor site outside of the food safety and quality group, because what I like to say is it's a joint sport, food safety and quality is, and what we try to do is make sure that our vendors understand that. So some significant changes to the program over the last 5 years or so, which I think we've seen the benefit of. But what we also need to understand is it's forever evolving and changing. The risks are changing, and I think that's what makes it, I'll say, exciting, because it is to a degree, but it's also become a little stressful now and again, as you know.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Patrick. And I like what you both had to say about the importance of investing in your people and your teams. All right, so now for our last discussion topic for today, and to give attendees some good food for thought. What is one critical thing that companies should be focused on to do better to better manage the impact of climate change risks to supply food safety and quality? And I'd like to invite each of you to do kind of a quick hit on this, maybe a minute or so, starting off with Kimberly, and then we'll go to Patrick and then Andrew for this question.
And look, Andrew has set the perfect platform for my one critical thing. And thinking about weather, it's impossible to predict. I mean, even most weather people that are meteorologists don't always get it right. And so that one critical thing from my perspective that you need to be thinking is you need to seriously look at how strong and well implemented your change management process is, and does it work? Is it not just on paper? So also bringing in some things from Patrick is thinking about how do you manage change and making sure that it's got a really well developed component that works with regards to risk assessment, and pulling together those strands of information to actually really clearly help you understand what the impact of any change is from on food safety of the product.
Thanks, Kimberly. Patrick, would you like to speak to this as well?
Yeah, I don't want to sound basic, but for sure, look at your quality and food safety system first and make sure that it is right, because then any other move, otherwise it has no sense. Risk assessment should be a priority and not anymore something that you do for audit. And then you have, to me, to make sure that you have very experienced people in the right places and give them tools that are developing over the time, because they will need more and more developed tools.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. And Andrew, final comment on this question.
I think probably the final comment is making sure your HACCP and your food safety management system is revised, evaluated to sort of predict where you can, and you've got the knowledge, the rising issues when it comes to food safety. So don't see it as a chore just because you need to get through an audit, because we have to show that we've done it. Use it for its intended purpose, which is to sort of preempt risks and manage hazards accordingly, because it's vitally important that you do that and understand it's supposed to be a preventative measure, not something to get through an audit. And I think if you do that and also use data, because I think the industry is notorious for collecting lots of data but not doing a lot with it, start to analyze it and see the patterns that you're evaluating, but also understand your supply chain and the complexity of the supply chain, because it's a lot. Sometimes it's a lot more complex than you even imagine it to be.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and thank you to everybody for this great discussion. So before we have the presenters address your questions, we'd love your feedback. So please take a few moments to complete our webinar survey. I think you might have seen that on our screen before. You'll also have the opportunity to do that at the end of the webinar if you didn't get to do it already, so no worries for that. But we've got a few good questions rolling in here. You can continue to submit your questions throughout the Q&A here, so feel free to do that in that Q&A and chat box. But I would like to throw out an interesting question for our panelists here right now. And I'm gonna throw this out to all three of you, and whoever would like to pick up, please go ahead and then put in your thoughts as you'd like. So in what ways do you foresee a need to adjust food safety program requirements due to climate change?
I'll go, Adrienne. I'll start that
Okay,
off.
thanks, Kimberly.
And I think, and in some respects, I think Andrew probably touched on it a bit, is food safety programs are living, breathing documents. They're not a document. They're a reflection of the ways that you work. And so, from a climate change perspective, do I think that we need to set requirements with regards to that? No. I think what we need to do is, much as we started this this webinar, is we need to start thinking about when weather events occur and the types and natures of weather events that we can have, and actually think about what are the biological, the physical, and the chemical risks that could be associated with those types of events, and ask ourselves the question about where are we sourcing things from, what is the risk to those materials, and we need to start building those things into our ways of working as well as into our food safety programs.
All right,
The
thanks so much,
platform's
Kimberly.
there. Yeah, the platform's there for us to use. We just need to use it.
Yeah, and I think it's making sure, as I said earlier, understanding your supply chain. And if you've got a multi-source supply chain, you might have different risks associated with that supply chain, and it's just making sure that you encompass all of them and understand. So that's why having a multidisciplinary team involved in the creation of a HACCP or food safety management plan is crucial, because they've got that knowledge. The food safety specialists won't always have that knowledge and understanding, whereas the procurement or a buyer may understand the supply chain a lot better, but not understand obviously the potential hazards or risks associated with it. So that's why it's crucial that a food safety team is made up of a multidisciplinary group, because everyone's got a part to play here, and they can bring some incredible knowledge with that if the group is facilitated effectively.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew and Kimberly. Let's move on to another question, and we will take a couple minutes over the hour here just to answer some of these good questions coming in. So for those who are on, if you'd like to hang on with us, please feel free to do so. All right, so the tools for predicting weather and or I cannot say that word today. meteorological changes already exist and are used, for example, for raw material purchasing and investments. So based on what was discussed earlier in the webinar, it is therefore a matter of using this information to predict food safety risks that are associated to a raw material source. Is that true? And what associated risks could this analysis perhaps entail for the country or region of origin? For example, maybe at a socioeconomic level, are your companies looking at that at all? Anyone who would like to answer?
Yeah, because here it goes a little bit technical, but I can tell you that yes, they exist. Yes, we use them, especially in wheat and in the countries where we believe it is required, for sure. They are tools that were born with the first aim of check the output and the growing of the plants to make sure that the output at the end of the season was the one expected, or to take decision during the growing time about which treatment to do. But they are modification of these have been used also to check the health of these products to make sure that they are really safe. This is what I can tell you.
Thanks
And
for
I guess
that
from
input,
my
Patrick. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead,
and
Kimberly.
look, what that spurs in my mind is that's just probably another strand of information, a strand of data to actually pull into that overriding risk assessment process, whether that's done through a particular tool or it's done more from a manual perspective as part of your assessment of your supply landscape. So clearly they have a role to play. Clearly they actually can inform us to actually better understand what types of threats or risks there may be to our supply sources. And I think give us one of those little flags or one of those key indicators that we also need to consider with regards to how and what types of risks we need to look at controlling once those materials come to our door. So it's not necessarily striking particular supply sources, but looking at what we need to do, as both of the other panelists said, to collaborate more closely with that particular region or that particular area, as well as what do we need to do internally to actually manage that quality and that safety of that supply source if we're going to use it within our facilities.
And of course, as I said at the beginning, I'm not really the leader of this kind of project, but we have a pool of agronomists in Barilla that is cooperating with research centers to use the data of this system and this tool to implement our data elaboration to take our decisions. So it's something that is quite consolidated in our company, but is not led directly by supplier quality.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick and Kimberly. All right, another question, and this kind of speaks a little bit to what you know about what your suppliers are doing. So how can innovations in agriculture and food production help to mitigate the impact of climate change on food safety? Can you speak to anything going on in that space?
Well, of course, innovation, maybe I'm not sure if it is the right word, but of course, when there is a scarcity of raw material, for example, now cocoa, the companies are looking for something else. So is that innovation? Maybe not, because it's just a different way to do the same product. But it is an area of change that, of course, will happen with the materials that will be more and more scarce. Then, of course, you can apply this also to innovation, because you can develop a product that doesn't need the ingredients that are most affected. So potentially, I guess it is possibly to happen.
And I guess from some of the companies that we're working with, and I think this kind of is where probably looking at regenerative agricultural types of practices, and a number of the companies that we're working with, we're looking to kind of support them by way of kind of verification of those practices, efficacy of those practices. But I do know there's a heavy piece of collaboration where 2 or 3 of our existing clients are heavily dependent on a particular type of commodity in a particular type of area, and really looking at how and what they need to do to support that grower base to actually implement better practices from both a biodiversity perspective as well as kind of an output perspective. Not an expert in that space, but definitely some increasing interest in that area.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we'll ask one more question. All right. So let's see here. How should the food packaging industries consider risks and climate change aside from looking at the raw materials? Can you speak at all to food packaging in the, when we're looking at climate change risks?
Well, in our case, most of our packaging is paper. I would say at least 60%. We didn't hear so far issues related to climate change, but we are aware that most of our sourcing is coming from forests. So I guess that at some point this may become a discussion as well. But so far, I'm not aware about direct consequences on this.
No, we see innovation with packaging, obviously, with the use of on different tangent, the use of seaweed and produced into biodegradable packaging, that type of thing. So I suppose that's a positive because seaweed can grow quicker and in warm seas, but specifically to packaging, I've not come across any direct linkage with sort of the climate change and packaging materials. Obviously, there's a drive to have less packaging, but we need to be cautious on that because obviously from a availability and a shelf life perspective, we've got to make sure that the food has the intended shelf life, and we have seen challenges in that area with a shorter shelf life, and obviously that leads to wastage, and everyone understands the need to sort of produce more food for the world because we want to make sure that there's not impact to availability across the world. But it's an interesting, and sometimes the food packaging people are sort of kept out of the loop when they should be very much a part of it, of the food safety world.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Patrick. All right, so this was a great discussion today, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have for questions. But please join me once again in thanking Patrick, Andrew, and Kimberly for sharing their perspectives, as well as today's sponsor, LRQA. So if you have any additional questions or comments, please don't hesitate to click that email us button on the console, and we'll share them with our presenters so that they can respond directly to you. And if you didn't have the chance to fill it out earlier, you'll be redirected shortly to that post-event survey. We always look forward to hearing how we can make our programs work better for you, so make sure to fill that out. And also please make sure to visit food-safety.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation to share with your colleagues, as well as information about our other upcoming events. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found this webinar to be a valuable experience. Have a great day.